Calling it quits, a prominent Kashmiri politician resigns in protest at unrest in Indian-administered Kashmir. So what will it take to restore peace? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Martine Dennis. Now, it's the worst unrest for years in Indian-administered Kashmir. Weeks of protests, more than 80 people killed and thousands wounded. The trigger was the killing of a popular rebel fighter by Indian security forces. That was in July. Tension between Kashmiris and the Indian government was already high over accusations of human rights abuses. And now, one of the region's leading politicians has resigned over the killing of civilians. We have Sreeram Chaulia, who's Professor and Dean at the Jindal School of International Affairs. Sreeram Chaulia, it sounds very much as though the government in New Delhi is being accused of making fundamental mistakes, responding to the discontent in the Kashmir region, not with dialogue and efforts to calm people's concerns, but instead with paramilitary forces, additional forces, and with crackdowns on the way people communicate and indeed the times in which they can venture out of their houses. A curfew's been in place for 2 months now. Fundamental mistakes have been made.
I don't think so. You know, my own view is that we have to see some of these protesters and the agitators as political actors. They are not just spontaneous, you know, people on the ground who are alienated. That has always been the case in the Kashmir Valley, even through the best and worst of times. What we are seeing often is many of these stone pelters as well as agitators have links across the border with Pakistan, and many of them are also financed and fueled by the Hurriyat Conference, which is a separatist outfit that refuses to participate in mainstream Indian democratic
politics. But would you
politics.
accept? I mean, would you accept that the growing, the spread of the protest, the growing, the sheer volume of the people who are prepared to turn out, throwing stones or not, and now including women, they're including children, whereas in the past it was able-bodied young men who would only venture onto the streets. This time, it looks as though the discontent is spreading to a wider section of the community.
Well, certainly there is, disenchantment, and for various reasons. There are economic reasons. Sanjay just mentioned that the countryside is up in arms. There are problems. I mean, youth unemployment has increased over time, and then over and above all this, there is a military presence and so on. I'm not denying that. But the response of the Indian state, I think, has been characterized as, you know, plain brutal and, you know, lacking in human touch and so on. I don't think so. What has actually happened is there is a kind of a tit-for-tat war that goes on the streets, and I've seen this in Kashmir many times. A lot of the mobs are actually financed and armed to some extent, and many of them get paid to turn out to fight. Okay. So it's not that, and then of course it spirals out of control. Once you have, you know, a counter reaction by the security forces,
all right, okay,
people get killed, and then, you know, insurgency and counterinsurgency logic start coming in. So I think we have to see this as a political process rather than simply a people up against a brutal state. I think this is actually politicized, and you have to look at the regional actors at play and who are fueling
okay, you've
and
made that
financing
point.
some of these.
Okay, let's go back to Sreeram now. And can I put to you the words of Zaid Rad Al Hussein, the UN Human Rights Commissioner, who says efforts to duck or refuse legitimate scrutiny raise an obvious question. What precisely are you hiding from us? These are the words that the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has levelled at the Indian government. He's requested that some of his observers can gain entry to Indian-administered Kashmir. He's been refused that. Why?
Historically, India has, demurred from internationalizing the issue. And India is actually a much bigger player than Pakistan, and believes that it can resolve the issue in its favor by virtue of its comparative advantages. So the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, well, he will express concern and will want access. But I think the Indian state sees this as a kind of, sovereignty issue. and as something that Indian state believes that it has a democratic mechanisms on the ground in the form of an elected government. 65% of the Kashmiris turned up to vote for this government, and the Indian state believes that it has enough of some kind of a legitimate framework through which it can resolve these problems without bringing in foreign forces. Historically also, India feels that it had been cheated when it took the issue to the UN in the first place, when Jawaharlal Nehru did it, our first Prime Minister, way back in 1947. So I think they are afraid of this because they believe that this is simply going to excessively politicize it even more, because then Pakistan will lobby for it and will try to bring in the OIC and Gulf countries.
Okay.
But Mr. Modi, interestingly, has also been bringing in the Gulf countries. And what you notice is diplomatically, this issue is not making as much noise or disgruntlement against India as it used to before. So I think New Delhi feels it's relatively confident it can handle this pressure from the UN, because the big powers have not said much about this.
I'm afraid, gentlemen, I'm going to have to close the argument now. We will revisit this problem, I'm sure, in the near future. But thank you all very much indeed. Sreeram Chaulia, thank you all very much.